Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the country or the world. My name is Chike Aguh, and I'm the head of economic mobility pathways for the Education Design Lab. And I'm really honored to be a moderator for this conversation. Welcome to day two of the College Promises Careers Institute. And we've really been focused on how do we build skills in and out of the workforce. And for this conversation, I'm really honored to be a part of. We're going to dive into the current labor market trends and figure out how students can become the workers of the future and how we can prepare and work with them along the way. We're honored to have the COO of the Markle Foundation and CEO of Skillful, a Markle initiative, Beth Cobert, who is with us today. In these roles, Beth employs her extensive background in talent management, partnership to really make sure that the most vulnerable learners among us and workers to be have the supports they need to not just get a job, but keep a job and grow into a career and change the lives of themselves and their families. And so I'm really honored to have Beth here. And really prior to her role, Beth was acting director of the Office of Personnel Management under President Barack Obama, and also served as deputy director of the Office of Management and Budget, and began her career at McKinsey and Company as a partner, working with clients along a number of sectors. So, Beth, we're welcome, and we're really honored to have you here as part of this conversation.
Thanks. It's great to be here talking with you and being part of this really fantastic College Promise initiative.
So let me start off, Beth, with a kind of unfair question, but I'll throw it to you. Um, we have a lot of conversation now about how skills are the new currency. We want to basically stop hiring on pedigree and degrees, and we want to start hiring on skills and competencies. So the unfair question to ask is, and again, you've been doing this work across the country, across states, and in your prior career, what are the skills that are most critical for individuals to have to remain the most competitive? And we know there aren't just one, but give us a sense of some broad patterns that you all are seeing.
Yeah. So as we look at this through our work on the ground in Colorado and Indiana, through our work across the country through the We Work America Alliance, I'd probably put the skills into three buckets. The first and the most broad, actually, to answer your unfair question, is the skill to actually be willing to learn and continue to evolve as the economy changes. We know the economy is going to change. And so both a mindset, a capability, and the opportunity to keep learning becomes incredibly important for anyone at any level in any role. Secondly, beyond that, I think when we look at categories of skills, there is certainly an increasing requirement for everyone to have some basic levels of what we would call digital skills. This does not mean that you are going to be the coder, but it is hard to think about an occupation today in which interacting with something digital is not part of your day-to-day life, whether you're a home health aide getting guidance and working remotely using some kind of tablet or phone, whether you're in a facilities person, like trying to do inspections and measurements and things. So there is just a critical element of digital skills. So 2/3 of the 13 million jobs that were created since 2010 have required medium or advanced levels of digital skills. And unfortunately, that is a place where access and availability of digital skills is very unevenly distributed. In fact, it's estimated that a third of workers don't have the digital skills they need, and that problem disproportionately affects Black and Latinx workers. So we've got to find a way to close that gap. And again, these are skills that I think are going to be embedded in every role. COVID has only accelerated that trend. It was coming before, and it is going to continue. But it's not all about those technical skills. There's also a set of skills that I call foundational skills. It is about interaction. It is about relationship building. And so those are also important, and they also are very transferable. And so I think the last piece, and frankly for employers too, is to say, what is the skill that someone has built through a job or through education, and how can it be applied to the new jobs, the emerging jobs, the jobs where there's going to be demand?
No, absolutely, and that's a really great place to start. So what I hear you really saying is one, obviously, as technology becomes more prevalent, working with technology is becoming, frankly, a new 21st century skill that everyone is required to have. You have obviously those technical skills which you need to do the work, and more, you need what I call if the technical skills are the just-in-time skills to do the work, there are these timeless skills, frankly, things we've done since ancient times that are more important now than ever because machines can do more and more of what it used to take human beings to do. So taking into account those patterns, talk about the long-term and short-term big bets that Markle is making to act on some of those learnings that you just talked about.
Sure. We at Markle have focused on this issue of how we can how by focusing on the skills individuals have, the skills individuals can build, the skills individuals can learn. And by getting employers and systems to focus on that, we can create more opportunities. We can create ways for the talent that is sitting there in front of us to realize their potential, to get connected to good jobs that they are more than able to deliver against. And so we're doing that in a number of ways. And in fact, the pandemic has taken what we were doing and forced us to say, how do we deliver impact at scale and at speed to respond to this terrible economic crisis? And in particular, the incredibly uneven impact of the pandemic on across the country, particularly for communities of color, particularly for those with less formal education. So we formed a group called the Rework America Alliance. It's a diverse set of national organizations, includes ourselves, important organizations with roots in the communities like the National Urban League, Unidos US, Goodwill, the NAACP, a strong group of employers, including Google and IBM and Microsoft, many of whom I know are part of this effort as well. A group of educators, including folks like Ivy Tech, who we work with deeply in Indiana, Colorado Community College System, ASU, and many others, to come together and say, how can we drive the change? And do this in a way by supporting the organizations that are already there on the ground, helping workers, right? How can you make it so that when an individual goes to a workforce center, a local Goodwill, their local National Urban League Training Center, that they have access to better insights about what jobs will be available and what skills they already bring that make them relevant for those jobs. They get access to coaches who can have that information and can support them. They get better insights about training that can really help them effectively connect to good jobs. And we are trying to do this and change employers, because to get connected to a good job, someone's got to hire you. And it means changing the way employers and those who work with employers think about talent, manage talent, and open up the doors. So that's the bet we're making about how to change the system to focus differently.
So what's interesting is what I'm hearing is, one, how do you get the right people around the right table to support the folks who are doing the work on the front line with the learner, with the worker, which I think it's an important piece of work that's rarely talked about. But in the end, this is too big a challenge for anyone to do alone. And there are people who are already there doing that work who've been chronically under-resourced, under-supported, and under-networked.
Yeah. So I couldn't agree with you more. We've thought really carefully about the need to provide support to these organizations because they're already there. It is hard to build trust in communities. It is hard to build the outreach to really understand and be effective in supporting workers and to be effective in supporting employers, right? So how do you make those folks who have the trust better equipped to do what they need to do and to drive that change? So we want to make it so that I would describe it in the case of employers as if we sort of said, hey, we can help you bring more talent, more diversity to your workforce. The first challenge you have is actually getting through their spam filter, right? And so rather than spending all your energy on that, how can you work with, whether it's local chambers, the workforce system, economic development groups, to get employers and help them move from intent to action in terms of being more inclusive, focusing more on diversity and equity in their hiring. Similarly, an individual in a community knows whom they know. And so how do you help those resources be more empowered with better tools and insights? So it isn't all face-to-face. There's a lot of role for technology and using data really smartly to make this happen. But trust is a scarce commodity. Trust in communities is a scarce commodity. And we really need to leverage those people who've built that trust.
Absolutely. And so there are two questions that kind of sprang from what you just said. One is, and you and I have we had this conversation probably a year ago. So when generally we think about the employer relationship, we think about big employers, the bold-faced names, your Fortune 100, 500, 1,000. But the majority of Americans, particularly those underserved, people of color, immigrants, first generation, they're working for small and medium-sized enterprises. So if you talk about that a little bit, how are you bringing those folks into the process? Because they're frankly as or more important than some of the big bold-faced names that we all know.
Sure. I remember that conversation as we were discussing, but we were actually in a room together having
Yes, absolutely. When we could do that.
when we could do that. our goal in trying to work here is to say, how can we connect individuals to opportunities and help employers, as I said, move from intent to action? It is not enough to convince people that actually focusing on an individual skills is good. You have to actually help them do it. You have to make it happen. And so we have been focused on building really practical, pragmatic tools that work for employers. We've done that in a number of ways, and we do it in conjunction with local partners. We started this work on the ground in Colorado and Indiana, and have great partnerships. So how do you help an employer do this? If an employer wants to focus on a role and describe it in terms of skills, we've got a tool called the Skillful Job Posting Generator, which you can find at skillful.com. It's free, by the way, so feel free. That says, okay, what do I really need for this job? What are the skills I'm looking for? So that, and by the way, tries to strip out the bias and language and other things in that posting so an individual can look and see, am I really able to do that job? So that's one way to change things. We've also used to do lots of trainings there, pre-COVID days, in person in local communities. Even before the pandemic, we were starting to think about how we could scale that. And so we have a course that supports HR and hiring managers across small businesses. It's called the Skillful Talent Series. It's part of the Rework America Toolkit and certified by the Society for Human Resource Management. So it's the kind of thing HR folks go to. We are turning that into digital learning so that everyone can be able to do that. So if you're in a small company where you don't have a talent acquisition group and a recruiting group and a screening group and an interviewing group, we've got ready-made tools, and we're putting that together in a way that will make real resources available for folks. And so again, the goal is, let's make it easy, because the last thing anybody wants to do at the end of a busy day is to rewrite a job description. So how do you make that happen, and how do you use the data you collect through that process to learn? So, and then we work with local chambers, local industry associations, economic development groups, others, to get that to small companies who are saying, I need better talent. I need to find a way to find talent. And even in an unemployment environment, how do you help them to realize that there is talent there? If they look for it in a different way, they will get better talent. They will get more diverse talent. They will get more engaged employees and better results.
So again, this is really, really important. And I just want to double down on a couple of things that you said. One is the realization for many SMEs that this is critical, that talent's out there. And these are particularly for folks who at times are experiencing labor shortages. God, I can't fill X position. And helping them think broader is one way to help them do that. And then secondly, just make it, as you say, make it easy, make it easy, make it easy. Create the tools for which, again, a Fortune 500 company has people that can substitute for some of the tools that you're talking about. But for a 50-person construction firm, for a 15-person hardware store, so on, so on, so on, they don't. And so what you've done here is creating this marketplace of public goods that can really make this work easier, which is really, really powerful.
My one of my favorite examples of sort of what we mean when we talk about skills is a manufacturing company up here in Colorado that grinds precision lens, very high-end machinery, complicated, digitized task, and a great job, right? Good wages, good benefits, all the things that you want a job to have. They had been trying to find folks for those roles and were just getting stuck. And so they started focusing on what were the skills they needed. And if you thought about what you needed to do this, you needed somebody who had real attention to detail, was focused on, a task that had to be replicated with precision every day. Frankly, not a task where you had to spend a lot of time talking to people. Interpersonal communication skills are not a requirement for this job. And turns out that two of their best sources of talent when they opened their eyes and thought about it were folks from food service and nail technicians, because that's what's required to repeat those tasks every single day. That opens the door to a whole range of different people. How can we make that happen for more companies as they're building back, as job demand comes back? We've got to make the recovery this time much more equitable, much more inclusive, much more balanced.
And again, just another thing I just want to pull out this thread here, which is thinking about skill overlaps for who has who have skills in what seem to be different professions that could be applied to mine, again, is another place. The Federal Reserve Bank has done has done a bit of work here, as have folks like Opportunity at Work. And so this is a really, really important skill. And again, this is helpful because what you're also seeing is you also have workers who, again, would like to speed their time to market. So find them a job that they can apply the skills they already have. Super important.
Yeah. And the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, Opportunity at Work are all folks whom we're working with in the
Absolutely.
Alliance. So we can take the work that each of us is doing, understand where it's working, amplify that, and then collectively take it together. And so there's a real opportunity there. And we're going to be coming out soon with some tools that can actually help an individual communicate those skills, give them the intelligence, use the artificial intelligence to help them say, oh, you've done that. That means you have these skills. What's relevant for the next job, and help somebody do it and even do it on their phone.
So let's dive into some of these interventions. We've seen the research around coaching, counseling being really key to helping, particularly a dislocated worker or someone who wants to do better, get that job. Dive into some of the work that Markle has been doing. You all are some of the pioneers and leaders here in the last few years. Talk about what you're doing and what you've learned and how it applies to the particular context that we're in.
Sure. So one of the places that we're really excited about, that we've been working in, is in coaching and career coaching, and that career coach could come from a variety of settings. It could be a career counselor at a community college or education institution. It could be the staff in the workforce system. It could be somebody in a community-based organization, all of those kinds of places. These are folks who individuals turn to and say, I need some help understanding what opportunities are, getting the support I need to pursue those, incredibly important. Um, Advice about training if I need training to make there, and frankly, just the support to make that journey. Wendy Copeland, who from Goodwill, who's part of the Alliance and co-leads our coaching initiative with the folks from Ivy Tech, would say we need the right touch, the right tech at the right time. So how do we bring that together? We've done a lot of work in Colorado and Indiana starting this and saying, how do we help these coaches be more equipped for their jobs? How do we help them understand what's going on in the marketplace and what the jobs of today and the future are and will hold? How do we help them connect with individuals? How do we help them find the way to give support? So we've taken what we've done there and again are trying to think about how do we get to scale and how to get to scale in a pandemic world. So we are working to take some of that training curriculum and make it digital. We're starting in Indiana. We'll be doing some pilots with Ivy Tech, who I know are very much a part of the College Promise world as well, to make those tools available, both about how to think about a skills-based job search using some of the tools, how to make sure those coaches are approaching their clients and the workplace with a focus on racial equity and understanding what the systemic barriers have been and how to overcome them themselves and help the workers overcome them, and how to change employers so they work differently. So we will have a set of tools and training that will be available for coaches. We'll have a set of tools around helping people articulate their skills, and that's all stuff that will be coming over the coming months as part of the Alliance.
No, and that's great. And again, what I like about again these counseling and coaching initiatives is that it takes advantage of a basic wisdom we all have. We all know that with one-on-one help, most people can do most things, and so being able to combine that with technology in ways that can be scaled is a challenge. Because if you look at most underserved populations, it's not that they're short of skill, they're short of talent. What they're short of is, frankly, social capital and folks who can navigate them through the thicket that is HR. I always do make the point. The majority of jobs are filled without a job posting, which again, most people don't know. It's because they knew something or someone, and some of what you're talking about is really critical to closing some of those gaps.
Yeah. The other piece I think that's really critical is the process of that journey for people is a complicated one, right? You are trying to find a way to get connected to a good job, but you need income today, you need support today, you need transportation today, you need childcare today. And so how can we make sure that the resources are really available to help individuals when they're wrestling with this? Because those real world problems can get in the way, and you've got to provide that support, and you've got to have, again, why we work with employers too, is you've got to have the person at the other end saying, wait a minute, there is talent there and I need to change to recognize it.
Absolutely. And so again, I actually first became aware of you during your time in the federal government. And I think right when you got to OMB, if I remember correctly. And so again, you spent a lot of time in the federal government. You spent now a good amount of time outside of it. What are some of the opportunities at scale to really help workers achieve the job they want, the career they want, their economic future? I have another question after that. But again, think about what are the at scale opportunities that you see that we, particularly as we think about kind of the next 4 years, what we should really be looking to act on?
Yeah, so to really make this change happen at scale, I believe that we need a broad coalition, right? We do need to bring together the private sector, the federal government, states, localities, nonprofit players, with a focus on making sure we create access and equitable access to opportunities to recognize the talent and get them into places where they can contribute, where they can get good jobs, and to make sure those things are there. So the scale is going to have to involve everyone. I think there are some roles for the federal government to help drive this equitable recovery, and we've been doing some work on those as well to think about what are the kinds of things that can make real dramatic improvements in our workforce education and training system. And so I think there are real and important opportunities to create new funding systems that provide access to training, including opportunity accounts that people can access. I think there are real needs and opportunities to expand career coaching, to give workers the support to navigate the job market, to navigate training opportunities, and find ways to get to economic security. There is not enough access to coaching today, and that coaching needs to be more effective. I think there's opportunities to incentivize employers to hire and train for quality jobs, and to make sure that those incentives goes to the employers who are actually creating the kind of quality jobs that can be life and family sustaining for individuals. And there's opportunity to scale all sorts of interesting things that we're learning about in terms of new ways of providing learning online and elsewhere. So I think those pieces together are a place where there's an important federal policy agenda, as well as this cross-sector collaboration.
So let's flip the question. What are the things the federal government can't do? What are the things that only other actors besides the federal government can do? Again, I think as someone who's worked in federal government, also at times in local government, there's a
Yeah.
tendency to believe that we can't do anything unless Washington moves. What's the flip side of this? What are the things that folks outside of the federal government need to do to kind of to make this work happen?
Yeah. So, um, this work has to happen at scale. That's part of the place the federal government helps, but it has to happen in real communities, in real ways. And so there's things that can be done, right? You can look at the 30 governors plus the mayor of the District of Columbia who've come together in the Skillful State Network. And by the way, a mix of red and blue around a set of priorities. You're saying, how can we bring things together? When you get particularly in some states that aren't the largest ones, that is a real community where, again, when educators are thinking about what the job insights are, when local community-based organizations can convey those opportunities, when employers can say, no, I actually understand that I can act, you can really make things happen in an integrated way. There's no point helping an individual articulate their skills if there isn't an employer that's ready to do that. There's no point helping an individual understand some of the gaps between some of the things they need to get to the next level unless they can find training that can get them. So I think getting this down to the on the ground is a place there's a lot of role. When there's a lot of roles for the private sector to do this because it actually makes sense in terms of accessing talent. Um, and there's a lot of roles for states and how they execute federal policy, and also around making sure that the data's there to help people understand what are good choices, what are real opportunities, what are effective programs. So there's a lot of work that actually has to happen in the real world, in real communities, if we're going to connect people to good jobs.
Um, Let me ask another question here. It's one that should be top of mind. I like to say that in this moment we are facing three pandemics. One, of course, being COVID. Second, being kind of the associated unemployment. Depending on what you look at, we're sitting right now hovering around 8%, between 7 and 8, maybe a little below that. And then, lastly, frankly, a pandemic we've had for a long time, which is systemic racial inequity that's permeated most systems within our society. Um, in some ways, you're working at the seam of a number of those challenges at this moment. Um, the question I have is, let's think about employers. And again, employers are a critical party here. How much are they how have you seen a realization of those three pandemics manifest? And I think particularly, I think about some of the work that Opportunity at Work has done, which is, for example, the racial impact of requiring a 4-year degree for jobs that don't require it, just as an example. Massively exclusionary for Black and Brown populations. So I'm curious, again, as we recognize those three pandemics, what have you seen, particularly on the employer side, the number one connotes realization, but also ways that you've seen them attack different parts of that?
Yeah. So the intersection of those pandemics, I think, is really critical. And Chike, I think the way you've articulated them is exactly right. And so we've certainly seen, right, both large companies and small, but large companies is just what you hear about more, right? A recognition that, right, the patterns of behavior in the past have produced systemic bias and they need to get addressed. So, how do you do that? And how do you, again, move, as I would describe, from intent to action? We've seen evidence that, taking a skills-based approach does produce a more diverse workforce. And because you aren't already sort of reinforcing the bias that says, when if you're requiring a college degree and college degree attainment is not evenly spread across society, you're just making the problem worse. So I think what employers need and what I hear is, how do I get from here to there? What are specific things that I can do? And then I think you need to put those into practice and see what happens, right? Are you getting a workforce that's better? We've done work with employers that have shown that moving to a skills-based model has increased diversity, improved employee satisfaction and engagement, reduced turnover costs. It is a good business decision to do that. And I think more employers need to recognize that, but they also need to talk, act more, maybe not talk less, but act more, right? Where are we going to put this in place in specific instances in our organization? How are we going to make those changes real and tangible? And not just change the job posting, which is really important and a good first step, but to think about, what are you doing in the sourcing process? Where are you going? What are you doing in the interviewing and assessment process? What are you doing when you're thinking about advancement and training once someone's inside the organization? So you've got to attack that whole piece, because it takes being conscious across all those steps to find the talent that's there, make sure it gets the real access to opportunities, and the results will follow.
And so I think this is really, really important. First is that, particularly pursuing skills-based hiring is the equitable and the efficient thing to do for your business. That's just an important thing to say, kind of at the end, at the front end. I think secondly, what I've heard you say is being holistic, in sense that it's not simply about getting more diverse bodies in the door, but frankly, how are we developing and advancing them once they are there? Because we see in some businesses is that bodies come in the door and then they exit fairly quickly, because either because of culture, environment, or just things that are not being done to support them. One initiative that I call out, just because in my day-to-day work we do work with CUNY in New York City, is the New York CEO Jobs Council, which basically 27 of the largest companies, chaired by Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, which has committed to hiring 100,000 low-income Black and Brown New Yorkers with jobs at an area median wage by the end of this coming decade. There's a lot of work to do there, which they will readily admit, in concert with folks like CUNY, as well as a number of other institutions. But those can provide models and stakes in the ground that hopefully we see replicated across the country. Let me ask you one last question, and one thing we have not talked much about are the role of 2 and 4-year institutions in this work. And again, you've mentioned, Ivy Tech. I know you're doing work with like that in Colorado. Talk about where they can play, and then we're actually going to go to, I think, a few questions from our audience.
Sure. So I am a firm believer, right, to what I said at the beginning about skills, is that people are going to need skills over the course of their lifetime, not just what they might have acquired between age 18 and 22 in one particular place at one particular time. And I think that is both the challenge and the opportunity, the real opportunity for 2 to 4 year institutions. How do you provide the kind of learning experience that an individual needs for both technical and foundational skills? How do you do it in ways that are flexible and reflect the fact that most individuals, right, at those institutions are working while they are learning? How do you do that in a way that really doesn't feel like it's one and done? How do you do it in a way that is connected to real opportunities so that when individuals invest their time and their money in programs, we are looking at outcomes and saying, are they getting the wage gains and the opportunities and the satisfaction that they have looked for? So I think there is a real chance, and we've worked with some great institutions along the way and welcome more to say, how do we really redefine what learning looks like? In a world where sort of 2 and 4 year are probably not the right way, not the way we're going to continue to learn and build skills, because we know we're going to need to do that. And even doing a great job of it for 4 years won't be enough over the course of what will be very long working lifetimes with very fast, continued fast pace of change in jobs and opportunities.
No, I think this is really important. And what I hear you articulating is a concept that's familiar to an older employer of mine. I used to work for General Stan McChrystal, proud West Point graduate, command, 4-star general. And if you look at the U.S. military, the concept of the war college, which is very simply over a long career in the military, they expect you to exit active time on the battlefield to go to a war college, learn, upgrade your skills, learn the latest and greatest, then send you back into the field. But ideally, will be a growing part of these institutions' missions, and I hear you say it, and I think I agree with, is how are you kind of the war college for the civilian, where they're basically upskilling, reskilling on a regular basis, a little more episodically, not as regularized as within the military, but but in a place where, hey, I expect to come back here because there's going to be something I'm going to have to learn, and we've always talked about lifelong learning. The question is again intent to action. How are we making that clear, quick, market aligned, and effective? If you had, I think a common friend of ours, Sue Elsperman from Ivy Tech, she would tell you, from a policy point of view, that's not actually what I'm incentivized to do. That's not the way that money actually flows to community colleges, where you're paid more for bodies and for amounts of time versus how many people got a job. And we're seeing that movement happen slowly. But that's another, I think, at scale change around incentives that will be really helpful. And again, we have so many great institutions that are call them in suboptimal systems that we can help, I think, change and do better in.
And I think there's a number of those institutions who say, let me understand better what I'm doing, what's happening to my students, and how can I use that to adapt what I'm teaching, how I'm teaching, to get those students what they need, right? So I think the more insight on that will actually help lead to more effectiveness overall. As individuals get access to that information, as institutions, some of the work we did in Colorado was helping the institutions get access to that information so they know and can act proactively to deliver better results for their students.
And so let me think about, and again, this actually comes from a question from Savannah in our audience. We know that the 18 to 22-year-old is not the normal worker. What we know is people are moving in and out of the workforce. They're dislocated. They're working. They have families. We know there are other barriers that keep folks from work, and let's name some of them: lack of childcare, lack of transportation, potentially they're supporting others, so on and so forth. Even things as tactical as, I'm not sure if I have the right shirt for an interview, or so on and so forth. So can you talk about either through the work you're doing at Skillful, Markle, or even other parts that you've seen, how have you seen folks tackle that in a way that gets around some of these barriers that too many workers to be run into?
So those barriers are all incredibly real, and taken one at a time. You can pick them off, but they usually also don't come one at a time. They usually come in groups, and so that is a lot. That is a lot for a person to have to take on. And so, to me, that is a place why we think career coaching, which includes helping people understand what resources are available for them for support, are needed, and why you need actually resources to support them. So I think one of the places we've seen that is is that's a place where a coach can play a really helpful role in helping someone understand the barriers, understand when there is support to actually get people through them. And I think as we think about funding and support, you've got to think about all of what a person needs to get through education and to get from learning to a job and a role. So I think that's a place where there is a real opportunity, both through coaching and through making sure that those supports are available and don't get in the way of an individual's talents being realized.
And what's really important here is that what I hear you describing is not necessarily something unusual. What I usually say is this isn't about doing something special for a few people. It's about doing what you do for some people, for all people. So if you think about for those of us who are lucky to have means, hey, I need childcare. I talk to someone who maybe has someone that they trust to do childcare. I talk to them and I pay for it. The question is, how do we do that for folks who generally don't have that same level of access? Again, in my day job at the Education Design Lab, we spend a lot of time thinking about learners, and we put learners at the center of what we do in a human-centered design way. And so you've had a chance to work with a lot of learners, a lot of workers to be, and I'm curious, what do you hear from them going through this process? What are the things that they most desire, the barriers that you hear them most articulate, and particularly some that have surprised you, or things that just aren't really talked about enough as we think about how we get people to work and back to work for the first time?
Sure. So I think one of the really critical barriers is um, because the system doesn't recognize the skills people have built, they don't recognize them themselves. And so there's a really important role for saying, you are bringing real skills to bear. I think about a woman who we worked with at one of the great community organizations we partnered with in Colorado. She had run a cleaning service that turned out for a couple of decades, but bunch of health issues, couldn't do that any longer, wanted to get into office work, and sort of her self-perception was, I'm not qualified. When you talk to this person to say, okay, let's talk about what you've done. She had successfully run a business for 20 years. She had never lost a client. She had actually expanded to hire other people. She had this whole thing going, including keeping track of all the finances, and yet she did not think she had the skills for an administrative coordinator role. She had those skills. She was, in fact, incredibly skilled, but the world didn't recognize those skills. And so that is, in fact, a frustration. How do you communicate what that is and enable that person to articulate that and to make sure that the person who's listening at the other end is hearing, right? That they are seeing a successful small entrepreneur, not an individual who claims, right? Like this was a very successful small entrepreneur who succeeded in, supporting her family, having a stable housing. She had succeeded, but the world wouldn't say it that way, and that's wrong. Got to fix that.
I mean, this reminds me of, for the Community College Growth Engine Fund that I lead, we work with Pima County Community College in Arizona. And for those of you who aren't familiar with their chancellor, Lee Lambert, I encourage you to look him up. Started his career in the military, actually. And he talks about when he left the military and he came back to the States. And this is another example of this. And tried to get a job. They said, oh, you're not qualified. You were just in the military. I think for those of us who are spending any time around our veterans, just as an example, they bring a number of skills, the challenges. We as a world don't totally know how to recognize them. And again, you see some of this. Well, the world says I have no skills, therefore I must have no skills, or I would have been hired already. So one, there is the self-efficacy that at times is damaged when the world doesn't recognize the value that you bring. And then tactically, again, from your point about as a business, you're looking over talent. And again, I think about some of the clients that you probably had when you were in the private sector. I'm sure you knew what their staffing and talent search budgets were. They were fairly big. And again, they could have probably spent less money if they had looked in more obvious places that were closer to them to get some of this talent. So I think it's a really important point. Let me ask, and we probably have time for about two more questions. For those of us who are here, we have a lot of folks who are, call them intermediaries. There are a lot of us who sit at this intersection of a lot of these different players, employers, learners, other government. what is your advice to them? Because the role that Markle serves, Skillful serves, and again, think of any number of organizations is really important, but it's also really nuanced and sophisticated, hard to do. So just talk about kind of what you've learned doing this work that might be advice to others who are here.
So, a really good question. I am a firm believer that the way to make change happen more quickly and at scale is to take the people who are already doing the work, who generally, let's assume I'm an optimist about most things in life, and I assume that most people come to work every day wanting to achieve their goals for their job, right? So if you're in an organization trying to connect people to jobs, that's what you want to do. So how do you help bring those organizations the capabilities that they often might know they want but don't have the ability to build on their own, and the ability to sort of build connections and drive that change? So my advice around this is to one, listen. What are the organizations telling us that they need? We started our work. I'll talk about coaching as an example. Um, and we learned a lot. We did it the first year, and one of the things we learned was when we went back, the coaches who were in the program thought it was fantastic, and their supervisors were like, nah, if you want to change my organization, you need more of me. Okay, we thought about that and said, that's right. How do we engage them more? So I think one of the critical things for intermediaries is really listening to your partners. What are the folks that are serving the communities that you are trying to help, really telling you about what their needs are? And second, how do you then think about scale from the beginning, right?
Mhm.
We've got to build scale in from the beginning. That's why, as we're thinking about with the Rework America Alliance, how do we build scale? We've got some fantastic partners between the Fed, the National Urban League, the corporate partners I described earlier, NIDOS. These are organizations with national scale. So we've got to think about how do we leverage that to get to scale. So that's it. Listen to needs and think about scale and sustainability from the beginning. Technology obviously is a key part of scale and sustainability. So those are the pieces I would focus on.
As a fellow recovering consultant, to hear the threes is very comforting for me. It's odd not to be doing this with slides, but it's great to hear. Let me ask two last questions,
Sure.
and we may have to hit quick before we close. One, talk about how COVID has affected this work. One, two, talk about you have 30 states, one district being the District of Columbia. What do you see? What do you think it'll take to get to 50? In terms of
Yep.
doing the work. So how
Yep.
do you get to 50 with the Skillful State Network, and how has COVID affected the work that you all are doing?
So let me start with COVID first. So beyond the fact that like we all live life in a Zoom room, a Google Meet, a Microsoft Teams room, wherever we are, we're living life differently. It has really increased for us the sense of urgency and the focus on the disproportionate impact of the economic fallout from the pandemic. Right, the three crises you talked about earlier. Um, we really have tried to think about how can we shape this work so it is focused and helping those who have been most dislocated by the pandemic. Um, how are we going to use it to address these questions of ongoing, systemic racial equity issues? So that has really shaped it. And it has reinforced things we were starting to do already in terms of how we can use technology as a way to work with organizations nationally and locally to bring resources to communities. You had to build that in from the beginning. So that's a piece that we've shifted. In terms of the states, we are building a coalition of the willing. We started the Skillful State Network, 2.5 years ago, thinking we'd get a handful, and we ended up with 20, and we're now up to 30. This is an issue that, in general, is one, as I said before, that has cut across partisan lines in terms of how can we create opportunities to make a difference in our states. And we've seen great leaders, Governor Polis in Colorado, Governor Holcomb in Indiana. We're doing some new work in Rhode Island with Governor Raimondo and the other states where we are. I think states have a really interesting role to play because they are really at that intersection between top level policy and actual implementation, right? They have to actually get stuff done for their communities. And so We are excited to actually take all comers. The requirement for joining the network is basically committing to saying this is an important issue and we're going to work on it. We're going to learn from each other. We're going to take what we can learn and advance the ball. So we're open to the next 20 when they're ready to sign up.
So, first of all, I really want to thank Beth for being with us and really walking through this and the amazing work that you all are doing and giving insight at this really critical time. And really thank you all for listening. And really, coming up next, we're going to have a power talk from Nathan Williamson, who's the Deputy Administrator of the Office of Apprenticeship at the Department of Labor. And we'll later on have a life cycle panel on building student skills and K-12 students and adults in the workforce. I want to thank you all for joining us. Beth, thank you again. And the College Promise for having this event. Have a great rest of the day, and we look forward to working together with all of you really soon.
Big thanks to College Promise for their great work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.